Our first reader today is Mary Hedengren. She's a graduate student from Provo studying rhetoric. She's been published in Inkscape, won Mayhew Awards, and been a founding member of the I Like April literary group. So it's safe to say she's a big fan of BYU creative writing. Her greatest accomplishment, though, is having been all of the following while a student at BYU. Early morning janitor, economics TA, Christmas gift wrap girl, cafeteria worker, RA for a poet, Museum of Art host, English teacher, and Stadium of Fire usher. Her biggest regret is never having worked on BYU grounds crew. One time, she had a cat thrown at her. She still has the scar. The cat, though, is fine. Please help me welcome Mary.
The cat story is true. I'm going to start with a story called The November Garden that actually started in form as a poem, but before it was a poem, it was actually a garden, but it's not nearly as spooky as it is in this story. Let me take you away, then, on the picnic of my choice, when all the trembles of November bees come out and settle thick like syphilis upon the pericantha. Perhaps you'll say to me, I've never seen a bee resurrect for just November. Then let me show you. You'll witness swarms that gather around my head like an ever-shifting halo. The garden's absolutely mad with them, and maybe one will land against your lapel, the lapel of your father's coat, when I take you on our picnic. But, you protest, where is this garden? You've never taken me to any sort of garden. Be fairly warned. This is my secret garden. I'll blindfold you, maybe with a cerulean scarf from Paris, maybe with your own rich tie, and spin you around 3 times. I'll tie your hands up with florist's twine, with red ribbon, with my own hair, and lead you stumbling there. You won't know how long we've been walking in circles, following the paths of crows, stalking ancient riverbeds, with only my hand on your wrist, reading your pulse, whispering behind you, step up. On your right, duck here. You won't even know from which angle the sun shines on your shoulder. That's how secretive I'll lead you. And when I finally cut you free with a penknife or with my own dazzling teeth and let loose your long darkened eyes, you'll squint around and wince around my garden enclosed by just 3 walls. Don't be startled by the idea. The bees won't hurt you. They've never had any mind to hurt you, but forgive them if they're curious, if they hum around you. They're really absolutely harmless. They see so few people here in this garden with 3 walls. They spend their time mostly against the berries, mostly up the ivy, mostly weaving wander paths between the blades of grass. They won't bother us on our picnic. I'll have brought some things. I'll have a picnic basket, like any lady, woven out of scarlet twig dogwood and black Jerusalem thorn. I'll have a pretty piece of quilting all stitched together, tied together, sutured all together like the joints of a rag doll. I'll spread my quilt down for you, and you can lie down on it. I'll let you trace the edges of each uneven piece. I'll let you ask me questions about the history of the blue ducking, the ink-stained flannel, the delicate embroidery on the orange and yellow silk. I'll let you ask me questions so I can blink my eyes, turn my head away, just like any lady, and smile in my silence. Let the bees take up the silence that swarms your inquiries about 100,000 torn and stained and useless things. Of course, I'll have packed a supper. And when I've taken you 6 or 7 ways apart against my picnic quilt, I'll open up my little basket and feed you my November things. The apple peels I cut into even rings, the flesh from off 2 roasted quail, last spring's first crop beets, still sweet, preserved, inviting vinegar that stains your mouth burgundy. No questions for me then. You'll greedily feast from my fingertips, and when I pour a glass for you of elderberry wine for you, you'll gulp the liquid down, though your mouth will remain squab-like open. For dessert, I'll dip my fingers in the little honey jar and let you taste from off my fingertips. And what will you eat? you ask, in all ways pragmatic, all ways mock chivalrous, so far away here from my 3-walled November garden? I'll let you eat first, feed you, care for you. But when I feed you honey, you understand, legion little golden bees will swarm from all around us. They can't help but be around us, and all those little golden bees will tempt me to your tasting. Let me warn you of the kisses I afford you. They flutter like afternoon light, like dry leaves over pavement, like wings against a dry and frost-stiffed flower. All my broken kisses, myriad against your hands and face, will come against you like the shudder of the wind. You don't believe me. We've never kissed. You've never dared ask for one, but even now, tracing the lines of my neck with your eyes, I'm making you nervous, aren't I? Do I scare you? Are you suddenly cold? Goose pimples up your arms? That's normal. It's nothing to be ashamed of, nothing to laugh off, nothing to check the clock again to see when you can seize an excuse and fly from me. You should fly from me. It's better to fly from me than wait till after our picnic, after you can no longer feel the soft oscillation against your eyelids and open your eyes. You won't know that eons didn't pass away. You won't know if I carried you or strung you up with spider webs to a cloud of migratory bees. You won't know how I broke the lock on your bedroom door and left you in clean white sheets in the cream and lavender dawn. But by then, you will peel the sheets from off your parched skin, from off the blistered, sticking burns of each remembered kiss. This lip-borne leprosy will be all that I can leave you when I leave you. And when November finds you, still lying in your sickbed, all the public health officials will pity you, will wrap you up in stiff white paper, and carry you out to the dark streets, gingerly, like a dead fly from off the windowsill. So that was a little creepy, wasn't it? You may have somehow gotten sort of a sense from this that I really like ghost stories. I won't say I like horror because I'm not quite sure what horror is, but I like ghost stories. I like old ghost stories. I like the ones where they're, sitting around the fire and somebody starts telling a story and it's in that sort of direct address. This is probably the shortest thing I've written. So they told me that I'd have a few extra minutes after having read this. So I've got selections from another story. And this story does sort of the same thing of that direct address, but a little bit more colloquially, just to sort of give you some background on this. As all good old 19th century ghost stories, this one starts with a bet. But it's a modern bet. The bet is that this couple who is rich and liberal and, NPR listeners and PBS listeners, that they aren't willing to take in a foster kid because they say, well, they're always trouble, they're always messed up. So their friend, who's a do-gooder himself, sets up this bet where they have to keep him, and after a certain period, if they still think that he's trouble, then they have to give an inordinate amount of money into the system to sort of pay off their bet. Fortunately, or unfortunately, the kid turns out to be extraordinarily fantastic, except for there are some very strange things about him. So here's where it starts out. So really, the thing that should have been our first hint that something was wrong was the fight. Wait, no. You think it was the chili? I don't know if the chili was really... Okay, I guess the first hint was the chili. See, Julie was going to make this chili for dinner one night, so she left the hamburger in the fridge to defrost. It was in a plastic baggie and everything, but it was raw, and David was up in his room working on his algebra or something when he got a call from... Where? Oh, the lost and found at Macy's, wasn't it? Anyway, they had found a purse that Julie had left there. No, nothing was stolen. She just left it in a dressing room, right? So she went down to get it right away. You were gone, what, 15 minutes? Okay, maybe 20. Anyway, she comes back and opens the door and smells chili. David's adding a can of black beans to the pot right when she walks in. He doesn't look up. Seems kind of shamefaced. What are you doing? She asks. Not that she was being mean or anything. She was just kind of surprised. I just started the chili. I hope that's okay, he says. All this time, he's keeping his eyes low. Oh, sure, but the recipe doesn't call for black beans, she says. Not that she's trying to scold him or anything, just so that he knows. He says he found them in the basement, and he thought that they would be a good addition, and he's also added chickpeas if she figured that would be okay, and then he just bursts out crying. Okay, now Julie thinks this is getting weird. You have to realize, David's been very stable, very balanced, like a rock, this whole time, even when we asked him emotional questions, like about his mother's death. But here he is, sobbing because he put extra beans in the chili. He starts promising her that he won't do it again, saying he's really, really sorry, stuff like that. Julie just leans down and gives him a hug, and he goes kind of limp in it. She tells him that it's just fine, and that she's certain that it will be very tasty. Then she suggests that they play a couple of hands of Uno while the chili's simmering and just forget about it. He dries his eyes, nods, and asks if he can go to the bathroom first. He wants to clean up. The rest of the evening goes pretty much like every night since David arrived. Julie tells me the story while David's setting the table, and we both make a specific point to say how much we like the chili. Julie, you even asked him if he could remember everything to put into it, didn't you? Like you wanted the recipe? Anyway, he looked a little emotionally uncertain about all of that, so we just keep telling him how good it was. Everything was normal at dinner. Well, that's right. Everything was normal, except at one point he turns seriously to us and asks if we think he ought to become a vegetarian. What for? I ask, which I know is not the best thing to respond in something like this, but really it took me for surprise. Don't you think that killing animals is a little bit like murder? He says, absolutely solemn. Julie then steps in and talks about how vegetarianism is a great idea if he really wants to do it, and how we can all stand to eat less meat and we'll start buying more meat-free things and all that. But David, after listening to it all, just shook his head. I was just thinking, he said. I was just thinking about it. It gets creepier as it goes on. More and more gruesome-y things happen. A kitten is found missing and disemboweled. And then eventually David breaks down and he tells them, hey, listen, I don't like to tell anybody this, but I have a taste for blood in my mouth. And there's nothing I can do about it. And it's happened ever since I was in this car accident with my mom. And so he confesses everything, and then he just gets up and he goes. Julie and I just sat there. What could we say? Every part of me was insisting that this was some kind of joke he was playing, but it made too much sense, you know? While he was changing the chili recipe, what appealed to him about vegetarianism, it was quiet for a long time. Then he stood up and said he was going to go pack his stuff. Julie snapped herself out of it and asked him why he thought he was leaving. He just shook his head. You don't want me, he said. You don't want me in your house. It's just like all the others. We just let him walk out of the room and go upstairs to pack the few things he had to take with him. Do you believe this? Julie asks me. I tell her I think I do. David's always serious, but this time he's really serious. This time the stakes are high. What do we do then? She asks. I tell her I think we should let him go. She protests, of course, says that we're abandoning him when he needs us the most. This is exactly what Richard was talking about. I don't know, though. I think he's sad that we know, and now that we know, well, nothing can be the same. It won't be the same for us, and it won't be the same for him. If he freaked out so much with just a tablespoon of split lip, something like this, well, he won't be able to talk for us for weeks. Julie insists we should take him to a psychologist, figure out what's wrong, help him get through this weird obsession. He's a boy, not a monster, after all, and all that. I don't know. Maybe I was just too disappointed. Maybe in that moment it was the wrong decision. When David came down again, he said that he had called Richard, that he was coming to pick him up. He sat down again on that love seat and put the bag next to him. You don't owe me anything, he said. He was staring at the hands in his lap. You don't have to do anything for me, but please, don't say anything about this. Don't tell Richard. Don't tell anyone. I need to start over. I can't start over if everyone knows about this. He made us both promise on everything holy that a secret was safe with us. Why are we telling you then? Even when we promised? We're getting to that. We ponied up the dough to Richard, even added extra money to start a college fund for David, and we just tried to forget about everything, forget that somewhere on the other side of the town was a 12-year-old kid trying to keep away from raw flesh. We were doing a pretty good job at it, until we had Carl Manns over for a dinner party. Dr. Manns works at my hospital, the hospital, it turns out, where David and his mom went after the car accident. He was flipping through the photo album when he found a picture of the three of us in front of the fun dome. Is this David Walter? He asks. We were shocked that he recognized him. Yes, that's David, we tell him. We were his foster parents for several months. I treated David's mother, Dr. Manns says. Well, both of them, really, but David wasn't so bad off, just some cuts and bruises. His mother, though, she was in bad shape. This was news to us. We kind of assumed that David's mother had died instantly. We kept treating her as best we could, Dr. Manns goes on. David was in there all the time, poor kid, not really knowing he was spending his last days with his mother. She had lost a lot of blood in the accident. We kept giving her transfusions, but nothing helped. She just weakened and finally passed away. I have no idea where she put all that blood. I'm done.
Our next reader is Annalisa Durden. She's also a Provo native and completing the last semester of her master's degree in poetry, after which she intends to pursue a PhD in Renaissance literature. She received her bachelor's degree from BYU in English and Arab Islamic Studies. She has the dubious distinction of being one of the few people in the human race, as far as she knows, who is allergic to potatoes. One time, as she was driving west on I-80, south of the Great Salt Lake, with her windows down listening to Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band, a golden eagle flew in her driver's side window, brushed her nose ever so gently with its enfolded wings, and as soon as it came, flew out the passenger side. Please welcome Annalisa.
Okay, the Golden Eagle story is not true, but thank you. I'm really glad to be reading with fine people like Mary and Bess, and glad to be here, and thank you for coming. The first poem that I'll be reading is drawn from my experience living in the West Bank for a few months. And I had a host sister who was 3 years old. I was living with a Palestinian family, and she thought it was very funny that I had such a difficult time with the Arabic language. And so she would help me by playing word games. She'd sit on my lap, hold her arm against mine, and ask me, who's the light one? Who's the dark one? And that was such an interesting figure to me for the situation in general, that's where this poem comes from. A name for difference. 1. Wire spirals, barbs slicing the green fields away from the village. Men stand in rows, waiting to leave fenced-in homes to irrigate their open land. Rows of cucumbers, melons, plum, and olive trees. A rock dove nests between the barbs, flies through when the men make her nervous. The crops wait, thirsty, across the barriers. She has wings to reach Calkilia. Israeli guards tell the farmers they need papers, making their lines between the hours of noon and 3 when a gate is open. 2. Man Suda, Man Beda. Who's the light one? Who's the dark one? A girl matches my arm against hers, creating a paleness and a darkness. Fans tiny fingers around my wrist. She's waiting for me to color us, find a name for difference. You are the morning, I claim. She laughs and compares our skin. Face to face. 1. I'm watching my blue-shot eye distort, the iris straw elliptical in the ripples of the moonlit water, dilation of the smooth, wet sheen. A fish mouth plucks the image from the surface. That swallowed eye searches out the puckered folds of fish cheek, enters the realm of drowned mayflies, glutted and spent from a furious day of sunlight and sex. A sodden wing folds over the arched traceries of veins, mismatched frames pasted over a window to the sky. 2. I'm left eyeless on the surface of the water, twitching lashes over the wet stars. Wind sketching lines across the canvas of the night. 3. There's that face again, there, on that unsettled glass. She must be drowning, but her eyes betray no desperation, no longing for breath. Shape of envy. The wind makes birds of leaves, makes visible the emptiness between ground and cloud. Deadened trees shiver with bird sound, warbler, thrush, and thrasher, rustle, trill, make alive without wind or leaves. How are words transformed to breath? If you tell the leaves green, will they perch on the trees, wrap stems around branches, and live? If I say aspen, will they shape like coins, glint when they catch between sun and wind? This next poem takes its title from an Anglo-Saxon poem, The Ruin, and the title means broken by fate. And the poem explores Fountains Abbey, which is this fabulous, ruined medieval abbey in England, where you have these structures of walls and columns standing at random, and nature is reclaiming the rest of the abbey. Werde gebrachen. A pair of larks twine through the fallen world of Fountains Abbey, empty traceries set to hold Christ in stained glass, acting out the tender violence of spring. Their exaltation nests in the split joints, shits, sings through the vestry, even echoes break here, from mortared stone to tree and air. That my body were ruined like this, Lord, the ceiling gone, the sky bleeding through me, unfurling from the fixtures of muscle, blood, and bone, my hollowed frame laced with weeds. The body, your recompense for godlessness and entrance. Lord, I could find you in my brokenness. Moon. Damned luminosity, I mean to say, how you delight to scuttle on the ripples of the night. No more than moon, more gaudy than the sun, you foil your difference as a rhinestone set in coal. I must tell you, friend, I've seen your clouds dressed up like lesser gods. Wisps of radiant silk flamed metal hot against a purple night by playing veil to your arched cheek. Do not claim that this is modesty, bright of face. I see your scheming fondness for light praise. I see you preen to hear men howl. I'll see you sliver down to nothing, down to absence before I ever see my face reflected in your pool, your lush, mad garden of silver. I am not a wave to be drawn by your fat hand. I will find other songs to sing of night and let you echo your own silence. This next poem is about scars, essentially, specifically about a scar that a boy in the West Bank showed me through the palm of his hand. And it explores the idea that scars are the body's way of producing poetry. The poetry of skin. Raised pink flower on his palm, the story of a gunshot. From Greek, askara, place of fire, or a diminution of scarth, a fragment. He shrugs an explanation, an accident of darkness, bullets, curfew, soldiers. Here, touch it. It's smooth, hard, blood-warm, strange violence, strange flirtation. Remember on the skin the way the body carries memory like poetry, in fragments, in lines of stolen fire. I, for some reason, draw on a lot of mythology in my poetry, and this next poem is written from the perspective of the wolf who suckled Remus and Romulus. The story goes that Romulus founded Rome, and he and his twin brother Remus were left out in the wilderness to die, and they were raised by wolves. Suckling Remus and Romulus. Like moon cry their noise, sharp, hunger bright, curious noise, curious slickness, belly smooth, not mine, sour stink, slippery, no teeth prick, fit dull mouths to teat, wet circling, tangle small worm paws, will clean pink young, musk them, slide tongue, taste salt, drink mine, drink claw, drink tooth, drink fierceness. All right, this next poem, again, draws on some figures from mythology. The two to explain, because I'm a nerd and just assume that everyone knows this, but you may not. Proteus is a Greek sea god who was charged with herding Poseidon's seals, and he could prophesy, but in order to get out of it, he would change his shape. But if people could capture him for long enough, then they could get him to prophesy. And the other mythology that I draw from is the figure of the Selkie from Irish myth, who is a seal who can take off their seal skin and take the form of a human woman. And this poem comes from talking to my sister while she was pregnant, and she would talk about her baby as, right now he looks like a shrimp, right now he looks like, a peanut, and that was so interesting to me. Apparently there's actually a website that compares your baby's development to different kinds of food along the way, which is a little bit disturbing in my opinion, but right now your baby is the size of an ear of corn, right now your baby is the size of a roast chicken, and that was such a strange idea to me, and it seemed like an interesting figure for the relationship of the poet to form, that's where this poem is coming from. To a fetus. Unlike the snake, you'll shed your shape with this skin, my little Proteus. Strange, shrimp-looking creature immersed in your amniotic brine, you'll shrug off this form soon enough, selkie your way out of this wetsuit, assume a personness. Buds to limbs, webs to digits, cartilage to bone. I could tame your mutability through all your amphibian dreams, wrap you in the folds of name, sing to you of belonging, make you my own. Do you resent the tide that lures you to the shore, to human shape? Does birth bind you like prophecy? Womb caught, I will be your revelation. Here will be your art. When your skin is fixed, shape your hunger. Okay, I'll end with one final poem here, which explores the thing about poetry that is the most appealing to me, and that is that in language we can share an experience. Reader and writer, speaker and listener come together and they experience the same thing through language. Meadow. Reader, we're here now, you and I, learning to stretch green and straight after the sun. The grass is waiting for the wind to roll up its skirts and silver, shimmer, catch hold. It's textured and abandoned when it moves. The stillness makes the crickets louder. You can roll the blades between your fingers if you want. Feel the ridges set to catch the breeze. Red tufts of scrubby flowers grip down beneath the grass sheets. Indian paintbrush. I play the part of absent wind, whipping the field to life as I walk ahead of you. It's static, waiting for a charge, still colored by the flowers you're thinking red, painting, until I slip a bee to vibrate past your ear, and you look up. A blue so unbroken it's painful, no clouds, no wind, no movement unless you brush aside the weight of grass against your legs and come, kneel in the crushed path. Watch the ants make a black line to their hill. Whisper, mountain, and I'll respond, prayer. Thank you.
Our final reader today is Bess Hayes. She grew up in Salt Lake and will graduate in December in German literature with a minor in English. After graduation, Bess wants to move to Berlin to learn how to bake German breads and pastries. Bess has made the most of BYU's international studies opportunities by going on 5 studies abroad to Germany, Austria, and England. Maybe that's why it's taken her 6.5 years to graduate. During her many travels, Bess sold her sister in Ghana, taught herself how to flirt in Germany, and consecrated herself a seeker of the Holy Grail in St. Nectan's Tarn in Cornwall. One time, when she was about a year old, she took her little white canvas shoe into the bathroom and dipped it into the toilet to get a drink. Her mother, as she was running in to stop Bess, broke her toe on the bathroom door. She lay sprawled on the ground in pain as Bess continued to drink out of her makeshift cup just out of Mom's reach. Please welcome Bess Hayes.
That's lovely, really. This is an essay called Mirror Faces. It's not an overstatement to say that I've tactilely memorized my face. I spend the day rubbing my eyes, scratching my nose, moisturizing my lips, and resting my chin and forehead on my hands. When I get a goose egg or pimple, I often feel it more easily externally than internally. And yet truly knowing my face in the mirror, knowing it visually rather than tactilely, does not seem quite so simple. I can look at it every morning and night and still be surprised by it. I won't go so far as to say that everyone enjoys looking at him or herself in the mirror, but I do think most people must find it compelling. It certainly is for me. I probably first questioned this powerful electric connection with my reflection while on vacation in Mexico. The motel room I was in lacked a desk or table, so I sat at the vanity to write in my journal. The room was a great deal less charming than the big, hacienda-style hotels we passed on the road there. Fluorescent bulbs gave my room a yellow-green haze. After escaping the room for a walk and dinner, I returned to the thickly green room, where I placed my computer on the vanity to write. But I was thoroughly distracted by my reflection in the large mirror in front of me. The overhead fluorescent light somehow bleached my dyed brown eyebrows, rendering them back to their natural invisible blonde. This made me smile. I liked looking at myself in the mirror as I wrote. As I did so, I tried to ignore the distracting lure of catching some secret view of myself, but I was unsuccessful, as my eyes in the mirror sought and caught themselves again and again, holding an infallible beam of recognition and captivation. Vanity, vanity indeed. I wonder if Jacques Lacan had a similar powerful experience when he saw himself in the mirror. The French psychoanalyst came up with the idea of the mirror phase, the stage of development between about 6 and 18 months when an infant can recognize its body in the mirror as itself. In this phase, the infant goes from looking in a mirror and reaching out toward the mirror and perceived other infant to reaching instead towards its own face and body. There are two main elements of the mirror stage. The first is the point of change in mental development. The second can perhaps be described as a desire for one's own body image. In other words, a narcissistic relationship with the body image, a fascination with one's own body. In this way, the mirror phase represents an ultimate subjectivity. The infant sees itself as a subject. The reflection changes status as a separate being and becomes an external manifestation of the self. The infant seemingly controls this image remotely, and it is captivated by its own image. I must still be in this mirror phase, because I'm still captivated by my own image. I watched this captivation in Mira, my third of 5 piano teachers. While I heavily punched out the tune to a light Hungarian folk dance by Bela Bartok, Mira turned from me to the mirror that hung conveniently next to her piano. She applied layer after layer of potent dark red lipstick, puckering her lips and smiling in rotation. As she flirted with herself in the mirror lesson after lesson, I grew increasingly irritated with her habit. As a passive-aggressive retaliation, I practiced less, trying to annoy her more. I'm fully aware my fascination with my face is similar to Mira's, but I flatter and excuse myself by determinedly avoiding puckering and overt attempts at altering my facial expression for what I may think is beautiful. The ironic contradiction nevertheless remains, and I am undoubtedly a hypocrite, for while I try not to change my face upon encountering its reflection, I can't help but do so. When I walk into a store or a building, I try to find my reflection in the glass. I often discover I'm cringing or otherwise unknowingly experimenting with pained-looking expressions. Writing, reading, cooking, usually I do them without thinking about how I look. But when there's a mirror or reflective surface nearby, I catch peeks of myself at unexpected moments, and I learn that I don't always look outwardly like I see myself in the mirror. In mirrors, I expect to see myself in certain ways, and I change my face based on these expectations. I'm often surprised with how I look when I unexpectedly meet my reflection, because I normally only see my practiced and prepared mirror faces that I make whenever I look in the mirror or see myself in a window, or notice my reflection on shiny surfaces like spoons and toilet paper dispensers. For my mirror faces, I change the angle of my head. I hold my tongue hard against my soft palate so my chin doesn't sag. I unclench my often cringing eye muscles. I sometimes hold my breath so that my face doesn't alter at all while I'm viewing it. When I do this, my nostrils go limp, and my nose looks slightly dead in its inert state. I do these things unconsciously out of habit. I observed this tendency in my sisters when I was a young girl, and it probably took a year or two for me to realize and notice that I did it too. My sister Lucy pulls in her cheek and relaxes her lips into a slight pout. Rosie's face goes coldly blank. Her forehead tightens, her eyebrows raise, and her lips slacken. Her jaw hardens, becoming more angled and defined. She steps back, turns slightly to the side, folds her arms, and stares herself down. She looks pissed off. Each of us has her own unique way of staring down her reflection in the mirror. Lucy and Rosie never make their mirror faces when they're not looking in the mirror. I must assume that I don't either. Sitting at the vanity in the motel room in Mexico, I tried to be natural by focusing on writing and stealing a glance at my natural face quickly before I reverted to a known mirror face. Of course I was fated to fail. As soon as my eyes locked, the spontaneous physiological reaction had been activated. I knew that face. Though I try to be natural about catching my own eye in the mirror, maybe it's not something I should really be natural about. It's a common phenomenon, and we're used to it, but it's kind of creepy. It's almost like you're splitting yourself when you look in the mirror. It's interesting to think about, the idea that mirrors have physiological and psychological ramifications that extend beyond merely making a practiced expression. Modernity has brought with it an increasingly hectic and fragmented life. During the same time frame, mirrors have become pervasive thanks to advances in manufacturing technology. One of the processes that helped make the mirror affordable and available is the silvered glass mirror. German chemist Justus von Liebig is given credit for inventing this process in 1835. Over the next few decades, he and others refined it, making the process viable for widespread use. Liebig's process involved the reduction of silver nitrate that deposited a thin layer of metallic silver onto the surface of glass. His process increased mirror production, affordability, and availability. The making of a mirror is an amazing spectacle. For Halloween, my first-year chemistry professor dressed up in a pea-green pantsuit, brown platform shoes, and tie-dyed lab coat. In this ensemble, he danced around the demonstration table to the Bee Gees' Night Fever, throwing powder in beakers and pouring liquids into vials as his student audience clapped, giggled, and was awed by his magical showcase. At one point, he poured something into a large, round-bottomed boiling flask. He held up his finger, indicating this reaction would take a minute, and with the other hand, he swirled the flask around and beat with his hips in the music. When he was done shaking, he smiled and tipped the flask upside down, but nothing came out. Instead, we saw that the inside of the flask, no longer containing a liquid, had been coated with something shiny and silver, something that was now solid. He had turned the flask into a round, bauble-like mirror that he soon began shaking like a silent castanet. But even long before Liebig or Taulin's reagents were used with aldehydes to produce mirrors on a massive scale, people still wanted to meet themselves in mirrors. Some of the first mirrors were made of polished pieces of obsidian, that black volcanic glass that cools so quickly its molecular structure doesn't have time to form any sort of crystal. As a result, obsidian has a conchoidal fracture, meaning instead of breaking in clean lines, it breaks in rippling circles and crescents, and can leave ridges so sharp they are only a molecule or two thick. I can easily imagine a broken obsidian mirror bringing 7 years of bad luck with cuts from minuscule obsidian shards that are too tiny to clean up. This glassy rock is naturally shiny, and polishing increases this. I wonder, though, at the ripples and bumps. Polishing would improve it somewhat, but I imagine other subtle variations remain on the surface, producing a primitive edition funhouse mirror that distorts the reflection. Thankfully, traditional modern mirrors are more reliable than those in a carnival, as they tend to at least lack a recognizable quality of distortion. But there's still distortion. Even when photons of light behave with utmost integrity to create a precise reflection, my image is nevertheless distorted by my unintended determination to see only what I expect to see and am used to seeing. A year ago, I had an experience that forced me to get to know my face anew. I'd taken my dog to the park where my sister's intramural flag football team was playing. Hobo is an all-muscle, 70-pound English Bull Terrier, and he wanted to play with the football too. Trying to distract him from the players running around and having more fun than he was, I walked him down to a dark corner of the field. I sat down and tried to get him to sit next to me. Merely pulling on his leash did no good. I tied the leash to a nearby pole and grabbed him, one arm around his chest, the other around his belly. I pulled him back toward me and let my weight fall on him to force him to lie down. But Hobo wouldn't give in. Instead, he reared back and with the hard convex arc of his rock-hard snout, smashed into my nose. As he'd almost certainly intended, I immediately let go. I was sure he'd broken and disfigured my face. My nose started bleeding at once. I leaned my head back to retard the bleeding, but my mouth filled with the bitter taste of the warm, iron-rich liquid. Hating this, I moved my head forward past my knees. Blood streamed from my nose and pooled in the cold, dimly lit grass, a mini scarlet tar pit. I had no way to stop the bleeding, as I was unwilling, too vain, to sacrifice any of my clothing to the cause. When her game ended, Sophie found me still on the ground, and Hobo resolutely chewing his leash into a weakened, threadbare restraint. Despite the throbbing, my nose felt intact enough, but I was still nervous to ask Sophie if it looked normal. Swollen but not broken, she determined. We went home, and I cleaned the dried rivulets of blood from my chin and hands. My dad, a doctor, examined my nose when he was in town the next day. Unbroken. I examined it at least hourly for the next week. Maybe it wasn't broken, but it sure was wonky. It was straight, but only from an angle about 5 degrees off center. Horrified and vowing to have plastic surgery immediately if I could find proof of the old version, I set out to find my real nose. I systematically went through every photo I could find of myself taken head-on. My findings were disturbing. All photos revealed the same thing: a nose like a rudder steering me perpetually to the right. Not once in over 20 years had I looked in the mirror to realize this, that my nose and the rest of my face have two conflicting opinions of head-on. The mirror, so brutally honest with zits, had lied to me about my nose, that most obvious and protruding of features. My wonky nose is evidence that mirrors skew. The image I'm practiced and trained at looking at in the mirror had become blasé, banal, unchallenging. I assumed I knew it. I look at and easily identify elements of my face: zits, blonde eyelashes begging for mascara. But I'm not in the practice of looking at the symmetry of each feature. After going to the dentist recently to have a broken tooth repaired, I sat in the car looking in the visor mirror. I was amused that my smile and pucker were failed attempts at unified symmetry. When the Novocaine wore off, the normal symmetry returned to my mouth. After hobo hit my nose, I was still aware of its misalignment once it had stopped hurting. I'm sad the nose pain didn't take the wonkiness with it when it left. If I can't rely on my visual reading of my reflection in the mirror, how do I find out what I look like? What do I look like? This strikes me as the visual version of the old query: if a tree falls in a forest and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound? It's easy to posit a theoretical yes, but that's based on previous experience. My previous experience in this case is what is unreliable. I can't rely on others to gauge an understanding of my face, because my experience with my face and others' experiences with it can never be the same. I can't see my face as others do, whether objectively or subjectively. Even if I made a video recording of my face and watched it, I couldn't experience it in the moment. And if I had a mirror always on hand and managed to avoid making mirror faces, I would always see the opposite of what others see. The mirror's negative image is a distortion of reality. The right-hand side mirror in cars always has the same thing written on it, no matter what kind of fancy or scrappy car it is. Objects in mirror are closer than they appear. So it is when I look in the mirror. I appear 2 feet away when I stand a foot from the mirror, but doubling this distance is deceptive, because in reality, I'm nowhere other than where I stand. It's a reverse sort of Zeno's paradox, multiplying the distance I am from the mirror by 2 and by 0, how far I am from myself. Despite this null variable, the answer is a staggering positive number of inches or millimeters. German filmmaker Wim Wenders made a film whose title describes this: Far Away, So Close. I stand in front of the mirror and at the same time inside the mirror. It's no wonder I've never noticed my nose was errant. Needing to overcome the false distance between myself and myself is complex enough to process without analyzing the minutiae of angles. Thanks.